Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Wednesday night wellness series called Dimensions of Wellness. Today we have Colleen Marie. She is an astrologist and medium, and she's going to talk to us about spiritual health. And personally, I think spiritual health is the dimension of wellness that people generally pay the least amount of attention to, but it has a huge impact overall. So I am dying to get into this conversation, but would you first introduce yourself, your business, and like kind of, how you got there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I go by Colleen Marie, mostly because my last names have changed over the years and they're not always easy to pronounce. So I go by Colleen Marie. I do astrology and mediumship. And right now, I am operating twice a week out of the Scituate Salt Cave, which is an amazing space that I get to do readings in their back room. And if you book the cave itself, I can go in there with you. And then I also do readings out of my home over Zoom. I also have an office down the harbor of Scituate as well. So if you can't do
Mm,
those Thursday, Saturdays, I can meet you there. Yeah, so that's kind of, I still kind of pinch myself when I realize that I'm actually doing this work.
yeah.
It's something that I've been interested in since I was very young. So the way that I got into kind of this woo-woo side of things really stemmed all the way back to growing up. I just felt this deep resonance with church,
Mhm.
going to church. I grew up Catholic. I loved having that time every week to reflect, to
Mhm.
connect, to pray. And then when I turned, and got into my teens and 20s, I kind of threw it out the window. And a lot of people, I think, went through a similar experience. Maybe
Right.
they became disillusioned with church as, a very patriarchal institution with a lot of rules. And as I learned some things about my family history, it really made me say, like, this is not what I want to be aligned with.
Hmm.
But I realized that I had kind of thrown God out with church. And the word
Hmm.
God is such a loaded term, which, you and I
Right.
have chatted about.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's more of like I threw out the idea of a higher, vibration of there being a divine basis to life when
Hmm.
I threw out church.
Right.
And then I went through a series of losses. So I lost my first kiss, my
Hmm.
childhood boyfriend. I lost my childhood best friend.
Oh.
I lost my college boyfriend. I lost one of my best guy friends.
Oh, I'm
Really
so
in this,
sorry.
yeah, in this crazy succession, really over a 5 year period where it was just one after the other. And my grandmother passed in that time too. So it was just this massive moment of like, wait a
Oh.
minute, if all of these people who were so vital to my life just a few moments ago are
Mm,
gone, what do I believe about death? And what do I
mm,
understand about the soul? And is there life after death? And so that really deepened my interest in mediumship. I started to go to psychics more. And in that process, I was told that I have my own gifts that needed to be explored. And that was what kind of propelled me.
hmm.
So I moved to San Francisco in my early 20s. I lived there. I worked at a crystal shop, and it was one of those things where, like, you wouldn't
Yeah.
believe how it just fell into my lap. And I worked at this crystal shop, was taught how to read tarot, was amazed at my own capacity to give readings that would bring up things that people were like, how could you possibly know that about
Mm,
me? And I think it was because I wasn't really taking myself seriously and I was kind of just playing with it that it became something I realized I really do have is this innate, intuitive ability. And what I think is so important in the work that I do now is that everyone has that.
hmm.
And it's become kind of my mission to help people, especially women, to connect with this innate intuition and to really understand that there is a more divine element to our lives,
Mm,
and that we can really trust in that higher power and release a lot of our, desire to kind of control everything over to the divine and to really infuse our lives with a little bit more peace.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where my, spiritual health comes in. Being a mother is definitely a big part of that as well, as I'm sure you can
Mm-hmm.
imagine.
Yeah.
Motherhood for me has been a massively, spiritual experience. It really wakes you up.
It
And
really does. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that kind of brings me up to today.
Mm-hmm. So this is just, it's fascinating how spirituality was a part of your childhood in one way, and in now as an adult, your own person, a completely different way, but still very strong. Um, you can, I like, there's a lot there. But my first real question for you is, can you describe what spiritual health is? Like, what does it mean to be spiritually healthy? Do you
Yeah.
need to believe in um, God to be spiritually healthy? Or, like what does it mean?
Yeah. So for me, as I mentioned, the word God, I think, has so many, you know, ways of kind of interfering with
Yeah,
spirituality.
yeah.
I know I hear God and I see a masculine presence. I see like the guy with the white beard in the sky watching everything you do. I do think that the Christian God and the idea of sin can be really, difficult for a lot of us to kind of connect to on a deeper
Yes.
level.
Yeah.
At the same time, understanding that there is like a divine intelligence
Mm-hmm.
to the universe,
Right.
I do think is a big, a massive part of being spiritually healthy.
Mm-hmm.
So whether we call it God or we call it the divine or we call it spirit, the universe, there's
Mm-hmm.
so many different names and I really use them all interchangeably. I've become a little bit more comfortable with using God as I've like, developed myself spiritually.
Yeah.
Um, but ultimately it's about that higher, intelligence, as I mentioned, that really is pervasive in our
Mm-hmm.
lives. And there is really no part of our lives that is not touched by the spiritual element.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing that and trusting that, I believe, is what spiritual health is all about. But to get there, I think does often require some of these more difficult things to happen. So I look at those losses that I told you all about a moment ago, and I see that if it weren't for that pain, I wouldn't question just the, I'd just be focused on the day to day all the time. I wouldn't be thinking about what is my soul trying to tell me? What's my soul trying to grow towards?
Mm-hmm.
I'd be just focused on the day to day. And I'm so grateful for some of that pain. And I do
Right.
think
Yeah.
that, none of us, whether we're spiritual or not, we're not, immune to
Mm-hmm.
pain and difficulty. It's about how we respond to it.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot about, I kind of look at it as this capacity to digest life. So if we are
That is such a
constantly,
great like phrase right there, because I struggle. I have, I think, the same definition in my head as you, but I've been struggling with the right phrasing, and that's brilliant.
yes,
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
this
your
came
thoughts.
to
That was
me while we were, while I was
Mhm.
preparing for this, and it really hit me like so often in life we get hit with difficulties, and what makes you can be hit with the same difficulty, right?
Right.
And I think of like, people who have lost a child and gone on to do, this amazing work in that. And then I see other people who lose a child and they don't get a chance to kind of grow from that experience. And I don't blame them in the least, but it's just
Right.
you can be hit with this same tragedy and two people can, move through it in such different ways. And what's the difference, right? And so I do think of it as like this capacity to digest what's happening to us.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at, and I was going to talk about this too, is when you look at, when we live in our day to day world, and unfortunately, I really believe in our culture, the stress levels, the lack of support that we get from community, from society in general, can
Mm-hmm.
be so debilitating. And there's this kind of pervasive, I believe, cultural belief that we are completely on our own and really that the universe is against us. so often this victimhood story is told where we just feel so isolated and so separate, and our pain is so personal and so individual.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're in that place of fear and lack and scarcity, we're
Yeah.
often in, fight or flight mode. And trauma is a big part of that as well. And I don't think any of us, escape trauma. I think it's something that we all have to deal with on some level.
Mm-hmm.
And so this trauma and this stress and fear creates that fight or flight, that sympathetic nervous system. So we're running on cortisol and adrenaline, and we're
Mm.
constantly like, how can I, and we all put it all on our own shoulders,
Yep.
how can I change things so that things are better, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that creates this deep sense of responsibility and obligation. And what if I fail? What if it all falls apart? And if it's all on my shoulders, then there's no escaping that idea that, like, oh God, this could all fall apart.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then there's when we kind of tap into a deeper understanding of our spiritual selves, when we see our lives as a story that's unfolding, when we see our soul as being on a journey,
Mm.
and, when we really connect to that deeper awareness through meditation, through yoga, through energy work, through journaling. I mean, there's so many different ways to get at that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's just as simple as like appreciating nature and
Mm.
taking a deep breath. Whatever way we use to get to a broader perspective and a deeper perspective, then we can switch into the rest and digest side of
Mm.
the parasympathetic nervous system. And when you look at it on just a strictly scientific and physiological basis, when we're in fight or flight, our bodies are not healing.
Mm-hmm.
They are not focused on repairing damaged cells. It's not
Right.
focused on releasing toxins. It's solely focused on keeping ourselves alive. And our brains are wonderful things, but they're not meant to keep us happy. They're meant to keep us alive, right?
Right. Yeah.
So if we're only, identifying with that part of our brain that wants to control and
Mm.
not seeing the self with a capital S that is kind of overarching all of that, then we're going to be in that fight or flight all the time.
Right.
We get into the self, the observer, the part of ourselves that, understands that this is all unfolding divinely for us, not against us, that it's
Mm-hmm.
all part of our soul's journey and transformation and ultimate, healing. Then we can get into that parasympathetic where we can rest, we can digest life, and then that creates that capacity for healing where now, because we're calmer, we're no longer just, our body is no longer only taking care of the emergency stuff. It can deal
Right.
with what needs to be dealt with.
Mm.
And I think that this is where, so often in life, we try to deny pain. We try to
Mm-hmm.
push it away. We try to create this kind of wall around it versus feeling it fully. So that's a big thing that I teach and that I love to encourage in people is to like feel the feelings, like get angry, get sad,
Right.
feel like if you can't get up in the morning because you're just overwhelmed, let yourself be. I'm a big believer that we are all cyclical beings, that there's times when we're going to feel like we can conquer everything, and then other times just letting ourselves be. And
Right.
that's something that I think our culture just does not, always reward.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's become a big passion of mine to just encourage people to trust themselves, to listen to their bodies, to listen to their soul. And how we access that is going to vary from person to person. But just having that moment set
Mm.
aside to be in reverence of this higher intelligence and this divine, aspect to life is going to always help us feel healthier overall.
Mm. I'm just like blown away because the example you gave of the two people who lost a child. I nearly lost both boys, and I was a different person in each of those situations. When Ronan was 4 months old, he had a staph infection, and he flatlined twice. They needed epinephrine when they were doing a surgery. It was really scary. But after that, I went into a very deep, dark depression because I was not spiritually healthy. I was not healthy in any way. I was just consumed by anxiety and motherhood and not, being able to control that situation or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
And then when with Dara, he he was having cardiac events in utero and needed to come out immediately. And he spent his first week of life at Boston Children's ICU. But I was a different person then. And yes, at first I was consumed by his health because I had to act, I really needed to be in fight or flight. But once he got better, that trauma was a springboard into this job that I have now, this
Mm.
career, this life where I am being, getting myself healthy and showing other people how to do it and this whole journey. So it's so interesting the example you gave, because I was both women. I was both of them. And
Wow.
it's so true. It's all about being able to ground yourself and take a deep breath and look at the bigger picture,
And
and know it's
trusting that
all
like
interconnected. Yeah.
absolutely, and seeing life as not something that we are like the only person driving the bus, right?
Hmm.
We're a passenger. And
Right.
while that is both scary in some ways to release that level of control and to really trust, it
Mm.
also means that we can like just enjoy the view, right?
Yep.
And know that in this, and I think that it's created this capacity for you and for me as well. It sounds like we both have this where in the present moment, because ultimately we know this is all we have,
Hmm.
we can kind of look around and appreciate. And I
Yes.
didn't
That
have that.
gratitude.
Yeah,
Same.
I didn't
Yeah, I
have that
didn't.
prior to my own spiritual awakening. And I just love that you are, putting out this message for people because it is hard to access without, someone else kind of showing the way.
Hmm.
And I believe like for me as a coach or a mentor or a medium or somebody who seeks me out, I don't see myself as being like, an expert or like a guru or any of that. If anything, my job, I believe, is to help people see it within themselves. And
Mm.
the sooner that you don't need me is the better, right? Because
Right.
I really want people to recognize that their spirituality is in their own hands. And there is no, and I've gone the wrong way in that, right? Where I've like believed that it was, if I just paid for this coach or this program, or I saw it as something so outside of myself for a long time.
Mm.
My hope is that, by going through these experiences, people can come to recognize that spirituality is in their own hands
Hmm.
and there is no other guru than yourself.
And it's, for me at least, the actionable steps. And this is actually one of the questions I have for you,
Yeah.
but it's interesting that you said that it's in yourself because the exercise of spiritual health, like the things that you need to do regularly in order to maintain your health, from in my mind at least, it's meditation, it's journaling, it's
Yeah.
affirmations, it's what, cast the vision of your life. What are you hoping, where you're hoping to be? And all of that is internal work. And all of that you need to do by yourself when you have some quiet. And that has been the one of the biggest changes of my life, is really focusing on what do I want?
Yeah.
What is it? Where
And
do
I
I want to be?
really,
And
yeah,
it's
I love
made
that you,
everything. Yeah.
yeah, I love that you use that question. What do I want?
Hmm.
Because a couple things. One, I don't think women ask themselves that enough. I think it's
Hmm.
very much about what does everybody else want, and I'll find
Yes.
my little like, corner of happiness within
Yes.
all of
Yep.
that. So
Yeah.
asking ourselves, what do I actually want in my life is
Hmm.
enormously important. Absolutely. And certainly not something that we as women have been encouraged to ask. So definitely that. And then the other piece for me is that I think there's a lot of idea that like spirituality is all about not releasing attachment, releasing the ego, releasing any desires, and just like, I don't necessarily believe that, right?
Hmm.
I think that honestly, a lot of our desires were given to us from a soul level.
Hmm.
And I kind of find, so I think of it almost like looking into a pond, right? If the pond has been stirred up and there's all this stuff going on, it's really hard to see yourself clearly. But
Mm,
when we find that time to let the sediment kind of settle,
right.
you get to have a moment of like, okay. So often, I think before I really started to do this work on a deeper level, I had all these desires, but they were really not my desires. They were things I wanted because I thought I wanted them,
Yep.
but I didn't know myself yet. And
Mm-hmm.
now that I've kind of and sometimes it does require that we take a step back from life. And I think I've done a lot of work with calling it kind of like a cocoon, right?
Mm,
Sometimes we need to pull back because life is just, we've put ourselves out there way too much and we don't really know
mm-hmm.
ourselves. Sometimes we have to say, all right, well, if I were to just pull back from everything, go into my cocoon, imagine like even for a second that I let my kids go with my husband for a year. I know it sounds crazy, but like whatever we can do to just kind of like imagine for a second that it's just us. What do we want then? And
Mm,
it's not something that somebody else is telling us we should want, and then when we come into that, what do I really want? That's when I believe it's actually our soul speaking to us.
mm,
And those desires are part of our soul's journey and not to be like cast aside. We're not all supposed to walk around like, not like I'm a Taurus, right? So as an astrologer, like Tauruses love their stuff. Like I love nice, feeling clothing and,
mm-hmm.
like I'm
Mm-hmm.
not afraid to want that stuff.
Right.
But I also know it comes down to, is it in true alignment with my soul? Or is it just something that I've been told I should want?
Mm-hmm.
So I love that you said that question because knowing what we want and understanding where that desire comes from is a beautiful thing.
Mm. There's a book called Wintering, and it was one of the first like personal development books that I had read. And the, it's basically about how we need to winter, like
Yes.
go inside, close the doors. It's okay that the blinds are, go and
Yes.
retreat for a bit after a trauma. Sometimes you just need, or, a
After
cycle
a
of
birth.
a birth,
Yeah.
something happens, and you need to winter in order to come back to yourself, let all the chaos kind of dissipate, and then you can re-enter life clearly and not frazzled. Um,
I
which
love
is,
that.
again, one of the big change that I've made in my life is slowing down and thinking, what what do I want like at the end of my life, and I look back, what will I be proud of? What will I, be happy that I did?
Yeah.
And what will I regret? And
Hmm.
I'm currently taking every choice I make is to that end result.
I love that.
It's and I really hope a lot of people watch this, because this was like mind blowing for me about a year and a half, 2 years ago when I first
Yeah.
started to dive into it.
Yeah.
Um, and it's funny that it's taking me this long to really talk about it or find a way to talk about
Yeah.
it.
Well, I think that spirituality is one of the hardest things to talk about because
Mm-hmm.
it's such a feeling experience, right?
Yeah.
How you express, and especially when I go deeper into the work that I do, I communicate with spirits and I can, channel your loved ones. And sometimes I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, is
Roxy
it, does it
visiting you.
explain what I do? Like,
Yeah.
I don't understand it myself,
Yeah.
right? So it is one of those things that does kind of belie words. It's beyond words. And
Mm.
so talking about it in a way that's really accessible can be difficult. So I completely understand why that might be get in the way. And I do think too that there is this, there's always, I believe that we have a bit of a witch wound as women
Mm.
because when you think about it, being somebody who was not part of the church but was a spiritual person who really connected with, a higher power, that was seen as a threat
Mm-hmm.
by the patriarchy for many, many, many generations.
Yes. Yeah.
So, many of us who are kind of coming out of that broom closet, if you will, does struggle with
Yeah.
being open about it because we feel like, oh God, am I going to get attacked for my views? Am I going to be seen as this crazy person and not taken seriously? When really, when we start with spirituality, when we start with looking within, when we start with the
Mm-hmm.
present moment, when we start with trust and surrender and prayer and faith, everything else works out. And
Right.
I think there's a lot of, people like that we might look up to, and we don't realize that their success that we see on the outside really does come down to that internal
Mm,
faith.
yeah.
And I think
J-Lo went live this morning doing her morning affirmations that she keeps next to her shower.
did you just say J-Lo?
J-Lo, yeah.
I was thinking about her.
That's so weird.
Well, there you go.
There we
I
go.
almost said like, I feel like J-Lo would be a good example, but I don't
She
actually,
did it this morning. Yeah.
yep. Look
Yeah.
at
I
us.
was watching her at 5:30 in the morning reading her affirmations. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's so important what I love about what you said. So it's so funny. You said three things that we need to do, right? You said meditation,
Hmm.
journaling, and affirmations. The three things I wrote down when we were to go over the three things that
Yeah.
we need to do. The first was breathing and meditation. The
Mm.
second was journaling, and the third was prayer, which is the same
Which
thing,
is
right?
affirmation. Yes. Yep.
So I think the word prayer, the idea of affirmations is an easier way to kind of take the idea of like asking the divine for something out of it.
Hmm.
But I think it's important that we aren't afraid to pray. I
Mm.
think prayer comes down to really just asking for, assistance from divine. And some angels, I believe that they're literally waiting for us to ask for help.
Mm.
And we think that, oh, who am I to ask for help for my insignificant life? But really, like, we are a microcosm of, of all things, and everything is connected. And if we take care of our spiritual health, and if we ask for help, and if we pray, and if we have this time, the ripple effect is so beautiful, right?
Hmm.
And I think so many of us like want to help our children, we want to help our partners, we want to help our parents, and we think like, oh, if I just like rush in and help them, then they'll all be better, and then I'll feel better. And it's
Right.
the other way around, right?
It
It's
is. That
by
was
taking care
another
of
huge
me,
lesson. Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
that everyone else will feel better, because they'll also feel, because so much is energy. And
Hmm.
I've learned that I am also a Reiki practitioner. I've learned through my, work with energy, just how deep that really goes. And, when somebody walks in the room and they're like in a bad mood, we all feel it. And the
Right.
only way really to elevate our vibration is by taking care of ourselves first, and then everyone else feels it on an
Hmm.
energetic level, and it's immediate,
It
right?
is. Yeah. And I find when I have taken care of myself first, which my morning, even if my kids join me, my morning is still my time. Like
Yes.
I work out, I write my schedule for the day down, I do my affirmations, I do a bit of journaling every single morning. That's the way I start. And I eat. I make sure I
Yeah.
eat.
Yeah.
Which, I wasn't doing before. I would just
Hmm.
at some
Just
point grab
rush
some
out the
snack.
door.
Yeah.
Yep. And I do think that it's important too that, like, for me, I used to approach everything with such a cut and dry perspective, right? I
Mm.
had to do my morning thing or else my day was shot. And I realized that there's this beautiful middle ground, right? Where it's like
Yep.
the intention to have that time. And let's say the baby gets up early, or,
Yep.
the husband is away working, or whatever it is that's in the way. I've learned to really trust that I can find moments throughout the day to bring me back to myself
Hmm.
while still holding that intention. Because I agree, like, having a daily practice changed my life.
Yeah.
And I almost think I had to have a very strict one for a very long time
Mm.
before I could kind of like release the kind of reins a little bit and just trust that every moment can be spiritual.
Hmm.
But it's such a marked difference than how I was living my life, that I had to be very specific about it for a long time.
Yeah.
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 I'm at that place too where I was like, it's ruined. Dara's awake. I can't do it. But
Yeah.
I'm now at the place. Well, you know what? He can join me, and this can be a
I love
time,
that.
time with just me and him, because he doesn't get a lot of that time. So
Yeah.
he does. He was
Yeah.
doing jumping jacks with me this morning.
I
Super
love
cute.
that. I love that.
Um, and you're right, because I've done it now. I've had my morning routine, so I don't know if it's necessary to like be strict for a while, but I can midday journal or do something that helps me slow down a bit, or just take a deep
Yes.
breath, or just sit outside. I do
Yes.
that when I need a break if the kids are losing it and everyone's going crazy. I will just go outside and leave the door open and sit right there and breathe, and then I can come back.
Yeah.
within 5 minutes, and have a better approach rather than just adding to the chaos and adding to
Yes.
the noise and yelling.
Yeah.
I did promise everyone we would get to how this impacts our overall health, but I do think that you really have
Yeah.
touched upon all of it. It's just
Yeah.
scattered, sprinkled throughout.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so this conversation has been fascinating. As every conversation with you is just
Thank you.
mind blowing. And I have to tell everyone that Ryan did a reading with her as well. And if you know Ryan, he was blown away by how accurate she was. And he's the most skeptical, logic, science based person in the world. And he could not get over it. So,
That was really fun. And I think I love being able to kind of, like I said, access it from wherever people are interested. Like if somebody is into astrology, it's a great way to understand the soul
mm,
having like a purpose in this lifetime. If
mm-hmm,
other people like tarot or just plain mediumship, I like that we can kind of talk about it from that perspective. And then there's the energy work, and energy healing is so powerful,
mm-hmm.
especially for trauma. And then just being able to have these types of conversations with people. I mean, that's one of my favorite things about the work that I do is being able to ask them like, well, what do you believe about,
Yeah.
your soul and your spirit and, the universe?
Mm,
And so often people aren't even asking those questions. And I'm so grateful to, be able to share this with
it's
people
beautiful.
and
Yeah.
and and to chat with you today.
Oh, thank you so much. I needed this conversation. I say that much. But if you are not, everyone in the, who's watching, if you are not ready to go down the full spiritual route, personal development, all of those books, that's how I started, because
Yes.
I was like, no,
Yep.
you know, no way. But I started with personal development. I started, with, like I said, that book Wintering. I've read A Year Yes, all those books, and got deeper and deeper into them until you get to The Secret and go
Yeah.
all the way.
Yeah.
um but start somewhere, because it's so important to reduce your stress levels and find a way to manage them, so that you're not inflamed all the time. And it's okay to be inflamed. It's actually part of your body's um protection system. But when you are stressed out and everything is tense all of the time and you cannot relax because you're running around, bad things start to, compound.
Hmm.
So find a way to start, find something that you're comfortable with, and just dip your toes in,
I love
and
that.
then go a little bit further and see where you end up. And I would love it if you would come back and tell us where you ended up.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah. Thank you, Colleen. This was
Thank
fascinating.
you. It was
And
my pleasure.
we should go for a walk because you're like
Yeah,
my neighbor.
right down the street. And the sun's out again, thank goodness.
Thank goodness. Yeah. All right.
Oh,
Thanks
thank
so
you.
much. I'm going to stop the recording.